So when I ask people, what do you want out of the church, or what are some of the things you're hoping for in terms of being connected to a Christian community? One of the ones that people always report back to me, but surprises me because of maybe the way I think or something, I'm not quite sure why, is that they connect with Christian community because they want to deepen their spiritual lives. Seems to be a very common thing that people are looking for, is to deepen their spiritual lives. And in fact, it's a fun story. When we were first sitting down with our call committee that ended up calling Pastor Abigail, our pastor of New Communities, and we were ranking. You have to do this form where you rank what are the things you're looking for out of a pastor, and the whole call committee put as number one, they had to rank these things, it was from this list, put deepen spiritual life as top one, and out of 20 things, I had it at 18 or something like that. And I was like, okay, so what's that all about? Everybody's thinking this way, and then what I realized is, I don't know what people mean when they say they want to deepen their spiritual life. Or maybe I do, but what I think deepening your spiritual life is slightly different from what other people think it is, or there could be, right? So this is an interesting question. What does it mean to deepen your spiritual life? So let me give you some examples of things that might surprise most people if I came back with, this is how you could deepen your spiritual life. So what if I told you one of the ways you could deepen your spiritual life is by writing a letter to your congressperson advocating for a piece of legislation that you think is in continuity with the social statements of the ELCA. Is that what you immediately thought of when you thought deepen your spiritual life? You didn't? No? Okay. Or what if I said, tomorrow morning you should go to the Washington Correctional Center and figure out how you could talk with somebody over the phone through their phone system? Or what if I told you that to deepen your spiritual life, you should learn how to really get pleasure out of changing diapers, doing the dishes, raking leaves, list out the things that are totally the normal things you're going to have to do next week, right? Because what I think people tend to think deepening your spiritual life means is, I want to learn how to read the Bible better. I want to learn how to pray better. I want to figure out how to have life mean more. Or, maybe shout out some other things that what comes to your mind when you think of deepen your spiritual life?
Be more like Christ.
Be more like Christ. Okay?
More selfless.
More selfless. Anything else? Be nice. Okay, all right. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Feel more connected to God, right? There's where the split lies. So when I say, let's all be more connected to God, our hearts and minds are going to go different places. And many of the practices that people typically associate with the church are spiritual practices that we think get us to God, but they detach us from the world. And then there are other kinds of spiritual practices that deepen our experience of the world. And that's the tension, essentially, right? So this is just an invitation to think about this in your own life. When you say you want to be more spiritual, what does that mean? And today is a good day to think about this because this is the day when we remember all the saints. And one of the things that's most remarkable about the saints is most saints are not commemorated because they were particularly devotional. Sitting around just thinking God-type thoughts. most of them are commemorated because they were so against some of the parts of their culture or their world that people killed them, or they died on behalf of, or became ill because of they went somewhere. So their spiritual life pushed them out into these contexts that often were dangerous or whatever. It's not completely the case. There were certain ones that are really odd where you could say they were hyper-spiritual in the other sense. Like, you ever heard of Simeon the Stylite? No? Simeon the Stylite built a pole with a platform at the top of it, and then he climbed up on the platform and he just stayed there all the time, in all weather, without exception. And then people, for his survival, people had to lift food up to him. He had to have somebody help him take his waist down. This is in the kind of the Desert Fathers period, like say 3rd or 4th century. And of course, people thought he was really holy, but strange because of this thing, right? But it was so odd that people really did kind of, and this has been a common practice among the saints. There were also the anchorites. Have you ever heard of any of the anchorites? Like Hildegard von Bingen or some of these other, Teresa of Avila. And what they did was they would build these little compartments that were attached to the cathedrals or the other church structures in their villages with no door. So they would literally anchor themselves to the church building when there would be a little hole going into the church and a hole outward, and then people would come and provide them with what they needed, and they would have to port everything in and out. And it was these are some interesting things that people came up with that were their spiritual practices. And what I love about the Stylite, this is my favorite story about Simeon the Stylite, is people said, well, you're just doing that. If you were really holy, you'd come down. And so one day he climbed down off the pole and he stood on the ground and he said, here, look, see, I can come down if I really need to. And they're like, oh yeah, you can. And they said, okay, so now can I go back up? That's really wild, okay? So if you start to pay attention to the way people have practiced spirituality, it's really diverse like that. It's hard to get a handle on what all counts as authentic spirituality. So here's my invitation then. The one thing that I think that spirituality is supposed to do, and this is the key thing, is spirituality is not supposed to make you feel like you've accomplished some kind of spiritual thing. Okay, I've read my Bible for the day, I can kind of wash my hands of that one, or I've done the amount of prayer that I'm supposed to do for the day, or I went to church, I've got it covered for the week, or all these kinds of things. What spirituality is supposed to do is it's supposed to be the Holy Spirit drawing you back into deep engagement with the world. And oddly enough, even some of these people like the anchorites and the stylites did that even though their practices sounded really odd. So when Teresa of Avila created her little anchorage, that was where people in town went for counseling. She was always there. And she had deep wisdom. And so when people would want a caring conversation, there was a window and you could go talk to Teresa. People would sit underneath the stylite and get conversational care from him. There was, even though it sounds bizarre to us, and a lot of spiritual practices are going to deeply draw us back into the world. One of the most spiritual people that ever lived in the 20th century was probably, the two that often get called out, right? Gandhi. What was his spiritual practice? He walked across India so he could go to the shore and pick up salt and break the law of India. And along the way, he picked up hundreds and then thousands of people to go pick up salt, because that mattered for people's livelihood. MLK Jr. was profoundly spiritual, and what was his spiritual practice? Leading a nonviolence walk, right? Training people deeply how to not react to violence with violence. But in the real world, sitting down at soup counters and restaurants. So that's one of the things that I'm always trying to challenge myself. And I fail at this quite often. I think the church as a whole, I feel bad about this because we actually fail at this quite often. We still give the impression that spirituality is about things abstracted from the world. I think that's really true. And so I'm always trying to think about what does it mean for the church to live together in such a way so that it deepens our engagement with the world. That's kind of my baseline. Any responses?
I'm glad you're not up on my head.
Clint the Starlight.
Yeah.
I think the challenge for me has been that deepening spirituality is going to look different from me than it might from Beth, than it might from Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the part, especially when we get into that nasty habit as human beings that we have of kind of judging other people, even unintentionally. Well, so Lori really isn't doing what she needs to be doing. Her practice is going to look different, be different than mine would.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And how do you know what's yours? So a lot of the people, going back to MLK again, another thing about him that's really interesting is he wasn't ever quite sure that's what he was supposed to be doing. He had a lot of doubts at a couple of key junctures as to whether or not he was really supposed to go in this direction that he went. And it required the outside voices of others to tell him, this is what you're called to. So part of spirituality, too, is testing out who you are with other people. Having other people help you go deeper into who you are.
So in the beginning, did you say that you kind of set up a dichotomy between engaging more with the world and engaging more with God? And they're kind of exclusive?
Yeah, I hate to do it as a dichotomy because I think it's weird. Okay, this will sound really paradoxical. Yeah, it's more of a continuum, or some forms of engagement from this will be the paradox for us. Some forms of engagement with the world are actually disengagement, and some kinds of disengagement from the world are actually engagement. So the stylite, which looked disengaged, actually was deeply engaged because he was committed to a place. It had this impact in his community that was profound. Some people, if they go to Christian care and community for the wrong reasons, it's actually, if it's condescending, you're just going in to help somewhere because you're so high up and you have something to give, then actually outwardly it might look like it's engaging more deeply the world, but the spiritual reason behind it is problematic. So yeah, I would hate to set it up as a dichotomy, but I do think ultimately it's this constant question, again, bring it back to yourself, is what I want to do in terms of deepening my spiritual life, engaging me with God's world? That's the interesting question.
Would it be a constant struggle to figure this out?
a lifelong, yeah.
I mean, even with the starlight and the individuals that are in those rooms there, it seems that there's a certain level of prestige that goes along with that. And isn't there a challenge of saying, am I doing this because people obviously in the starlight look up to me, or people talk with me and they refer to me, and that's something that brings prestige to you. And that's one of the challenges for me with saints is if you're a saint, everyone remembers you. Mm-hmm. And if you're
dead.
Well, yeah, if you're dead, but that's something that, as an author, I want people to read my books to remember my stuff, preferably while I'm alive, but certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's the challenge there. Is when is it you, and when is it